Hi there. Okay, I wanted to make a video to talk and give you more detailed instructions about your reading intervention project that you're going to be doing this semester. You will have responsibility for conducting a thorough reading assessment of a student either participating in the Garcia After School program or one who attends a school in which you currently work and with whom you have permission to interact. I've had a couple of people ask about other arrangements. We may be able to make those, but make sure you've either chosen a Garcia Center student, a student at a school where you work, or you have cleared your project plan with me. You're going to develop also instructional recommendations based on that assessment, which you will either implement yourself or that you can implement in consultation with either a Garcia Center tutor or other instructional personnel where you're completing your project. You need to address all of the following, and I'm going to go through these requirements and then I'm going to talk about some potential tools that you can use to complete your assessment. Your summary, your first part of this project that's due is your assessment summary draft that has to be submitted for feedback by the 9th of October. We will have an optional class that day in case you're working on it and you have questions that you'd like to ask. These are the things your description should include: the age of your student, the grade level they're in school, their race, their ethnicity, what is their language status. It's going to be real important for you to determine whether or not your student needs support because they're in the process of acquiring English. Also, their disability status if it is known. So you may have children who have an identified disability. If you do, then you need to state that. Or you may have children who are simply having a difficulty in an area of reading. That either option is fine. I have there an observation summary. One of the things I'd like you to do is be able to observe that student in the environment in which they're in. So if you're working with a Garcia Center tutor or a Garcia Center student, plan to attend one afternoon and watch them during tutoring. Or if you're working with a student on your campus or in another environment, plan a time when it will be reasonable for you to observe that student engaged in some sort of reading activity. And we can talk about some of the options there. Then you're going to report on all the assessment instruments that you used and the scores you have obtained. You should, as appropriate, have information related to all 5 pillars of reading instruction. So we've gone through some things in class. Now, with that said, I would say, as a general rule, we do not assess phonemic awareness once students are in 2nd grade or above, but critically important for kindergarten and 1st graders. And under some circumstances, you might assess if you really felt like that was a significant issue for students who were still not reading at 2nd grade level, okay? But you're definitely going to need a measure of word identification, of reading fluency, of comprehension and vocabulary, and we can talk about what some of those are. If you have questions, you need to let me know. Remember that the DIBELS has a lot of those components. We've been through it in class. I've given you the website. There is an opportunity for all of us to go and practice using the DIBELS on Tuesday afternoon. I believe that is, let me look at my calendar so I don't give you the wrong date and confuse everything. That is October the 3rd at the Garcia Center. I'm going to be there about 3:30. I think we'll have an opportunity to work with children up until about 5:15 or 5:30, but the sooner you can get there, the better if you're going to take advantage of that. If you are going to be present at the Garcia Center, you need to let me know. Then after you have gotten all your assessments and you've summarized that information, you're going to then come up with a recommendation summary for what you would recommend doing with this student, either what you're going to do yourself or what you're going to do as a result of, or via a consultation model. Excuse me for struggling with my language there. So identify specific strengths. Those can be things that are identified by your tutor through your observation and the assessment, or any and all of the above. So you're going to identify the student's strengths. You're going to identify their specific needs. You're going to identify what their baseline instructional level is. So I want you to tell me this child is reading at a beginning of year 3rd grade reading level or an end of year 5th grade reading level. You're going to find that instructional level, and we've talked some about how to do that, but as you have questions, I'm happy to go over it with you again. And then based on that baseline, you're going to establish a goal. Now remember, chances are good that you're only going to be able to engage, or your student's only going to receive intervention toward that goal probably a couple of days a week. So you're obviously not going to expect a year's worth of growth in 4 or 5 weeks based on 2 or 3 times a week, right? So make sure that your goals are reasonable. A goal should be one sentence that includes a condition. So under what circumstances are you going to expect the student to demonstrate a certain knowledge or skill? The behavior, so what that knowledge or skill is and how the student is to demonstrate it, and a criteria, so how you're going to know when the student has successfully met that particular goal. We can talk about that as well. That's something that all special educators have to do, is to be able to write a clear, concise, and measurable goal. And then you're going to recommend strategies for improving reading outcomes related to that goal. At the most, 3 to 5. But remember, we have limited intervention time, so figure out in what area does this student seem to need the most support, and what are some specific strategies I can use to build their meeting of that goal. The materials and resources that either you're going to use or you're going to recommend that your tutor use, and you can certainly include things that are online, but everything needs to be referenced. You need to have a mechanism for gathering progress monitoring data at least weekly. Think back to what we were reading about data-based instruction at the beginning of the year and how those assessments were done to determine whether or not the student was benefiting from instruction. And then, if you're going to be doing a consultative project, you need to summarize your consultation meeting with either the teacher or the tutor that you're working with. If you're doing the intervention yourself, that will not be required. Okay? And then once we go back to once we get to the end of our project period, you're going to follow up and you're going to go back in and observe again. You're going to repeat the assessments that you originally used to be able to determine if the child made progress or not. And certainly your goals should be tied to some of those assessments. Any additional information you feel is needed to inform an understanding of those scores of the student's progress. So it may be the student, was very ill during the intervention and missed quite a bit of instruction. That's something that you're going to need to report, because that will help us know how to interpret those results, right? And then again, if you're meeting with, or you're doing a consultant model, you need to include a summary of your final consultation meeting with either that tutor or that teacher. And the last thing I want you to do is give some recommendations. So if you were to continue working with this student, what would you work on and why? And then the very last thing you're going to do is a self-reflection in terms of your strength and how you leverage them to complete the project, the things you learned, either with respect to the conduct of consultation or with your role in the process, and things you might do differently in the future. So I'm really just wanting you to think back about it. Think about what you learned about assessing and intervention, what was effective, and what you might change in the future. At this point, I think that that should give you an overview of the expectations. I know we've talked about assessment tools, but because our semester's been shortened, we've done that fairly quickly. I definitely advise you to go ahead and get some practice with those tools before you go out with what you're going to use, before you go out and assess those students. Remember that the DIBELS has some measures that you can use for phonemic awareness at both kindergarten and at first grade. There are nonsense word and word reading tasks associated with the DIBELS. There are definitely fluency measures, oral reading fluency beginning in the middle of first grade and moving up through sixth grade. The reason you don't have oral reading fluency in kindergarten in the beginning of first is because we're not necessarily expecting students to be reading fluently at that level or to be reading in connected text, but your students may very well be. And so remember, you're going to start using whatever tool you use, and you're going to aim to assess at a little bit lower level than where you think your student is, and build up until you hit that ideal instructional level for them. And remember, that's going to be where they're reading at least 90% of the words accurately. And when you look at the chart that you're using for the assessment, it shows that they're not at any risk at that particular level. Okay? You're going to need to do some kind of comprehension and vocabulary task. I do not particularly like the comprehension section of the DIBELS, but I did talk to you about possibly using Maze or other kinds of comprehension measures. DIBELS is simply a story retell. There is a vocabulary section of the DIBELS, but there are also other vocabulary measures that you can use. So we can visit about those things, and in conjunction with your plan, remember that I'm always available to consult with you either during office hours, by phone, by Skype. We can make it work for us to have a conversation. I look forward to your questions and look forward to seeing your finished products.